Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher here in the Continuous Deployment of Capability Directorate with my colleague and my boss, Hasan Yasar. He's been a frequent guest of ours on the podcast series, and I want to welcome him back. So welcome, Hasan. Today we're going to talk about, can DevSecOps make developers happier? So this is a little different conversation than we often have, but this kind of points to the cultural aspects of adopting DevSecOps. And so I wanted to give Hasan a chance to talk to us about that today. Before we get started with that, Hasan, why don't you give us just a brief, for those who haven't met you before, introduction as to what you do here at the SEI and what brought you to this kind of work and doing this kind of work at the SEI.
Suzanne, thank you so much for having me, and it's another pleasure to talk with you. I always enjoy talking with you for any condition. Thank you. So I'm a technical director at SEI, but I have been working at SEI almost more than 10 years, actually. Time is flying, 10 years. And why I came SEI, and I was working at industries and for 20 years. I did a lot of engineering support, engineering work, and writing a code for various environments, various technologies. I ended up really using that my knowledge and experience in a research and also academia domain, like really helping to the world. Then how can we connect the dot between researchers and also practitioners? There's always disconnect in between. So I ended up myself in SEI and exposing and getting my learning pieces into the communities. Then after studying SEI, I realized that we're not really following so much the modern software engine practices. That's how industry is going well in terms of like for software deployment, development, all this capabilities. When I started the first time in 2010, and I built up the first DevOps pipeline in 2010. Then we started really push that boundaries and how SEI can help mainly for DoD and also the rest of the industry practitioners on helping them to build up engineering practices using modern tools and techniques by thinking engineering thought behind it. It is not just the tools, talking about what the right engineering concept it is, so we can use the right tools, right methodologies. That's why I ended up in SEI, and I really enjoy to really working with the communities and working with our sponsors as well as the people who needs help to identify what needs to be done for engineering practices. Mainly, we are talking about DevOps and DevSecOps. Maybe next time we're going to talk something else. We may say AI ops, who knows? We may say something else, but engineering practices is not changing, which it's just evolving with the better automations and with the speed relevancy and also the improving the more business oriented.
All right. So when we're talking about those practices, and we're talking about DevOps as a multidimensional way of understanding how to go through a pipeline from concept to capability, which is how we basically talk about it. I wanted to use Dan Pink's model of talking about sort of happiness, but from the viewpoint of what are the things that tend to make knowledge workers in general happy in their work. So the model has three components. One is autonomy, one is skill mastery, and the third is purpose. And so I thought that would be a nice way of framing, how does DevSecOps improve the developer's experience in all three of those areas? So why don't we start with autonomy? So how is it that DevSecOps improves a developer's ability to be more autonomous, to have more control over their decision-making environment and the development environment?
It's a great way to start, actually. So I'm going to give a little bit background for DevOps and DevSecOps. It is all about automations. So there are four principles we have been talked many times. The four principles on DevOps It is infrastructure as a code pieces, automation specifically, and culture and communications and monitoring. To achieve all elements, the automation is the fundamental component in DevOps perspective. Like, what is fundamental? If we are talking about the feedback mechanisms, has to automate the way to share the outcomes from the CI server or outcomes from any static analysis result that can be shared. So automation is playing a key role for sharing. Automation is playing a key role for a manual steps and make it automated fashions like test cases or test scenarios or running multiple security testings or running multiple functional testing as well. The best part is I really like that pieces. Then I spend years for manual. I know how the pain it is. It's deployment perspective. Like I remember that when I deployed application creating MSI files and years ago, it looks like a decade for me, more than that, creating MSI files, which is installer, then packaging up, and then try different environments, different version of the Windows. I remember I set up 5 different machines with a different Windows deployment and try out that my MSI is going to work or not. It was a pain. It was really a pain. Now with automation, it is really helping me try out different environments, different platforms, and saving my time. So when you look at that perspective, it's helping my time to automate that process. Second, I can see the result immediately, if it is going to work or not, what I have to do, because that's a troubleshoot perspective is also important. If you have a manual step that you do for a deployment for testing, it is very challenging to go in depth and find out what is not working, what type of problem you have, versus if you have done automatically, and then system or the server or the automation script will tell me it's going to work or not, here's the problems. Makes me really happy in terms because I can see the result immediately. So there are things we can discuss, but that's why automation perspective, saving my time and taking the manual steps and saving my time for automation perspective. So what is the real outcome of that automation? It makes me think about for new concept or learning fast or getting a result, getting an impact so we can expand that effectiveness. It's mainly like I'm not doing the same thing, which is manual over and over and again. I do more automation.
So one of the another concept that we talk about that comes from the work of Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace on team topologies is cognitive load. And what you're describing is you're removing some of the extraneous cognitive load that things like having to have 5 machines to deploy your install environment, is going to create. It's not really focused on the application. It's just focused on the extraneous aspects that have to be dealt with. But if you can automate those, you don't. The other piece of autonomy that I wanted to sort of look at a little bit is governance, right? Because one of the things that I've observed in DevSecOps environments is that if the governance structure, if the management structure of the organization trusts the automation and trusts the kinds of decision-making criteria that have been put in place for successfully moving something forward, that's another aspect of autonomy. Because if I don't have to go to a change control board after every step and have a human look at this, I really do gain back some autonomy as I sort of pass my work through the system. And if I fail fast, I fix it and I move on. But as it progresses through those criteria and makes it through the pipeline, I don't have to do as much interaction with the governance structure to be able to get to the capability deployment. Have you observed that as well? And sort of give us some examples?
Yes. I think the biggest challenge for the security perspective that's related with the compliances or the governance role, and how can we pass the guardrails? How can we pass some static analysis result? Or how can we pass some the test coverage with respect to security? So all days we were running various test tools with the security perspective, like static analysis, as I said, or using a basic application pen testing. These are really takes time and get the result. Then based on the result, which is about the 50-page report, then the person has to negotiate with the security folks and to address those items negotiations becoming a more political sometimes, becoming more confrontational. If you use automations, that system is going to tell me what needs to be done as a specific vulnerabilities. So basically, we are taking out the human elements of criticizing or sharing a 50 pages of report. Now we have very specific feedback comes from any specific test result from the CI server or any type of test harness that really helping to a team, or which is developers, and to work on a specific subject. There is also another side of the automations, which kind of goes back to the trust relationship and also opening up more cultural awareness. And if my security team members are sharing the artifacts in a digestible way, which is maybe a feedback, maybe a small size of information that the dev team can work, as opposite, and dev team can share all the infrastructure pieces as scripted. We call sometimes a bill of materials. We call about what does my build script has in it, all my dependencies and all the software build components, and will be shared as a script. Script is actually another set of automation concept, because you can automate something, you have something written, which is a script. Sometimes tool will do the work for us. Sometimes as a developer, we have to write a script. That script can be a bash script. That script can be just a few configuration item. That can be any type of a tools, either the tool input, like maybe a chef, maybe a cookbook. Any tools is having some input file. So again, this is a script. So developer can write that script and share it with the security teams. Here's my dependencies. Here's my list of the items that I'm going to work on it. So basically sharing that artifacts in automated fashion, creating a transparency between the two teams. So transparency is actually resulting in a trust. So if I trust as a security person that I trust what the developer working on it, with effect, it is not, hey, I'm working on this one, I'm pulling this library from here and there. The variable is not accepted in today's technologies, because sometimes verb is leading that, security perspective, like, I don't want to trust what the word says, I have to trust what fact it is. Because end of the day, as a security person, I am responsible and reliable to protect my systems.
Sure.
Then hearing that artifacts from that perspective, which is automated fashion, it's creating a trust in both parties. I think we have to look at what is make them to happy. Trust is one of the elements. If you trust each other, we're not arguing each other anymore. We're not doing a confrontation anymore with the people. We are talking based on the fact. We're not really making up something. The fact is becoming a key driver and sharing the artifacts on both sides. Same thing for security.
And database decision-making.
Exactly.
Are the things that enhances trust. And trust enhances our autonomy. So that all right. So let's move and talk to mastery, skill mastery. How does DevSecOps improve a developer's ability to gain new skills? And I've heard you speak of some things right here. What if I've never done, the kind of configuration mapping that you're talking about into scripts and things like that? That could be a new skill for me. But what are some other things that you've observed that relate to improving skill mastery as opposed when you're talking about people using DevSecOps?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If it is okay, before diving to the skill mastery, I would like to say one more thing that goes back to the trust and also the happiness. And we did the DevSecOps survey as a community survey this year. This year, team was more about the happiness, about the peoples and then the developers. There was interesting findings we came out this year. We find that if the team are happy what they are doing it, and they are relying more on the fact, versus team are not following DevSecOps practices, they are relying on the rumors. Rumors are he said it or she said it, what the system it is. So it was really interesting to see that survey, that people are using fact are used by the happy team members versus the grumpy developer are using whisper, rumors basically, which is kind of because they don't know, they're making up something.
Using hearsay.
Right. Either they're making up something or they're assuming something. In the security world, assumption is the big enemy for us. We cannot assume something. We have to really work on based on the fact. And the happy developer are working based on the fact more effective than the grumpy developer. It was a survey actually. We run it this year.
Excellent.
So going back to your questions, the increase in the skill, is important, like the new skill set. So how DevOps is helping again, and with the skill set, let's start with automation perspective, Suzy. If I did more manual steps, if I spend most of my time, I gave an example, like spending most of my time setting up a 5 different environment just to test my script is going to work or not, it doesn't give me enough time to learn the new skills. I'm spending the same, maybe more, on the same work over and over and again. And if I spend less time or manual steps, it's going to open up a room in my calendar. It's going to open up my day. I can look for the new concept. I can look at the new technologies. I can experiment a new concept, maybe new techniques and new algorithms. Probably I can get my systems better. If I do more catch-up work, I always be behind the work as basically I'm doing rework or following the work. Versus if I spend more time of new things, I will learn that stuff. If I'm going to learn new technology, it's perfectly fine because I will have enough time. And what we see in our organizations, in DevOps organizations, the biggest return of investment, it is basically eliminating rework. The rework means repeat the same work over and over and again, or doing the same installation over and over and again. And based on the recent survey from Dora Research Institute, and what it says, like DevOps is really eliminating, sometimes in high performance organization, which is DevOps organization, sometimes it is basically eliminating 90% of rework. It's a huge number. What is really telling us, if I take the rework from a team at 90%, what team will do? They're going to stay doing nothing. They will learn something. They will investigate. They will spend more time to learning as well. Like another things, actually, I'm going to reference to the survey. And happy developers are spending 65% of their time by learning, and grumpy developers are spending 45% of their time on learning. So basically, you see a 20% differences. Then the happy developers are learning more as self-paced.
Right.
So how they are do, because they are using more automation concept, they have enough time to learn as self-paced. If I spend more time, 20% is a lot. 20% technically like 5 days in a month, if you look at that perspective. 5 days in a month is a learning. If I spend 5 days in a month just learning this stuff, I will increase the skills for various perspectives. Automation, maybe learning new technology, learning new tools, anything I can, or maybe make it a better coding and better writing algorithms, another way of improving our skill sets.
And to that point, one of the things that I've also seen developers, and I've heard from developers, is that infrastructure as code piece is actually a learning mechanism in many ways, because I can look at different ways that different developers have formulated their infrastructure as code environments, learn things that way. And a lot of it has to do with, you automated that. I didn't know you could automate that. I see what you did. And, then I can incorporate it into mine. So there's a lot of that transparency, I think, is what I want to point out. The transparency of the environments is actually a learning tool as well as a tool for autonomy and trust. So are there some other things out of the survey related to skills that you wanted to bring up before we move on to purpose?
Sure. And give another example, actually, from my students. I have been teaching DevOps in CMU last 5 years. And always I start with the first as an assignment and write the steps in a basic text format. Next question was, can you convert the steps into the automation script? People are struggling, the students, which is the graduate students at the first and second one, but they're learning how to write automation script, how to be effective learning of the tools of the script that they're writing. So it's basically helping them to learn the new concept. At the same time, it is teaching them to basically write a good script by verifying what they have done it. It's another problems with the software communities. We always thinking my code is going to work all the time. We don't know it's going to work all the time unless we have to test it out, right?
You heard that? Yeah.
You have done it. I may have done it all the time. Yeah. Now, right, with the automation concept, which is IAC concept, it's really telling us how much we are accurate in terms of the writing component.
Right.
In the script is going to tell either yay or nay, it's going to work or not. There's no excuse. But if your instruction is not clearly written, I may make some mistakes. Maybe as the producer can make some mistakes. So I'm a consumer, I can some mistake. Basically, a lot of integration or a lot of write-up problem we may see as a result
Well,
of
I'm back
manual
to
process.
assumptions again. I'm
Right,
assuming,
right,
when I'm giving you instructions, I'm assuming that you're hearing what I'm intending, but
right.
you may have a different context. You're not necessarily going to hear it. When I tell the machine
Hmm.
the instructions, the machine only has one way of interpreting. And if I didn't write the instructions correctly, it will not interpret them correctly. It'll fail.
Right.
So we have more boundaries for failure in some ways when we're doing human to human than we are when we're doing human to machine. And that's something that
Exactly.
improves our skills also.
Exactly. Right.
So,
So for the survey, we discovered a couple other items as well with the happiness and then unhappiness. Again, happiness means teams or the organization are doing DevSecOps, following the maturity of DevSecOps, like automation, integrations, which we cover up. Interesting to we cover up this, we saw this year as well, about the friction. So friction between the management team and also the dev team.
okay.
So guess what? Literally, the grumpy developers are 80% dissatisfied with their management because their management is disengaged. Only 10% of developers are dissatisfied. 80% of as the grumpy developer are dissatisfied. There is a really huge differences between the teams. Happy teams, 90% satisfied, and then versus grumpy 20% satisfied. It's a huge differences.
Yeah,
It was
it
really
is.
interesting because one of the elements for DevOps, we have been talking about the friction. So friction is going to be element frictions. Management team says something and dev team says something else. Again, it goes back to the assumption. Or there's a disconnect between the leadership because leadership is asking another component, maybe something else is not transparent what the expectations are for a given work or the schedules. So there's always a friction in every level for the expectations, for the work, for the deliverables, for the any type of schedules or the quality of the code. There are many frictions we can see that. It was really interesting then so that happy developers are more happy with their management chain versus a grumpy developer. It was interesting.
Yeah, so that comes up to alignment, right? That brings up alignment as if we're not aligned, if we don't perceive as a developer that the business understands what it is we're trying to do for them, that's an alignment problem that leads to that kind of dissatisfaction. And vice versa, if the business doesn't believe that the developers understand how to serve the needs of the business, we have an alignment problem. And
Right.
so both of those are they point back to. I mean, in some ways, I'm probably searching a little bit. I may be reaching a little bit, but that's actually part of the purpose aspects. Is if we don't communicate the purpose of what it is we're building, and we don't communicate the purpose of the automation, we don't communicate the purpose of the way we have the governance structure set up. If we don't have a mutual understanding of purpose, that leads almost immediately to those kinds of alignment issues.
That's one of the reasons actually why people hate or they don't like the waterfall concept because it's creating a friction from each team members. What the manager says in a written format, maybe the Word document or something else, it's not clearly set the expectation of the work and sharing some artifacts and dev teams interpreting different ways and using different tools in different environment, creating a friction in the communication perspective. Other friction is the schedule perspective, like developer estimates something, either overestimated or underestimated, create another friction for the PM, program management, or the business owners, what needs to be done, where we are, what we do, what is the current schedules, are we on time? It makes a lot of stressful. So in that situation, of course, people are going to be looking for different perspective because everyone have their own incentives. So DevSecOps bringing a team concept and including the management team, including leadership, they are under the same team because their goal is, as you said, their goal goes to the business perspective. Right. Here's our goal. Here's what we'd like to achieve. Let's look back. Let's see how can we achieve our goals that we said we're going to do in 2 weeks, right? Based on the goals, we can look at the work, what needs to be done, and everybody take the piece of the work and then working with the tools and get it done.
That 2-week aspect, because when you go back to waterfall, we're not talking about getting through requirements to testing in 2 weeks typically. We're talking in many complex DoD systems, we're talking years. And so that the disconnect in alignment often happens because of the amount of time it takes from the conception of it on the business part of the requirements to the actual implementation. It may be the guy who wrote the requirements may be long gone by the time I actually get the specification to develop from. But with DevSecOps, we've compressed that time. When in the context of Agile, 2 weeks is a typical, or even 1 week. But the actual cycle of getting a function through the pipeline and verifying that it works as intended and meets the intent and the purpose of the business much, much faster. And now I can correct if we have a misassumption between the two of us. I haven't spent a lot of time working on it. You haven't spent a lot of time trying to explain to me all the nuances of it. We can just say, oh, no, it's this, not that, and we can move on. And that's huge in terms of reducing the friction that you're talking about.
Right. And friction with another friction we haven't really touched up with the users, right? If the users see the result in a short time frame, we'll understand what the user needs to have. Another actual happiness, maybe I forgot to say that, if I see my code is being used from a users, makes me happy. Like I'm proud of it because somebody using my code. And otherwise, I heard so many stories from our team. I made that, right? Here's my code. Somebody using that. I got a lot of interest. Makes us really happy because creating a software is an art. And then somebody has to appreciate that. What is appreciation comes from the users. And usage of that code that we produce makes the developer happy. If we see more usage of the work has been used in a typical user, makes them really happy. I saw many times in my career, my work histories, and I saw many times if my code is not used, makes me real uncomfortable. I don't want to go back to that project again because I don't see an impact on working on it. It's kind of wasting my time. I don't want to waste my time. I would like to get really working on a project. The code is being used from users. Makes me really happy. Right.
So that's the other piece of purpose is if I can see that what I've done has utility for the intended user or even unintended users, then I have that sense of what I'm doing is worthwhile and I'm not wasting my time. So that's another aspect. What were some other things on the survey that came out about sort of user satisfaction and sort of that purpose element related to happiness?
So interesting one, again, job satisfaction. So guess what again? Job satisfaction. Happy developers are more satisfied with their jobs.
Yep.
Because they are really happy what they are doing it. And job satisfaction is bringing talented people together. And what the survey says, 90% of people are satisfying their job as a happy developer, and 60% dissatisfied as a grumpy developer. Interestingly, and out of the response, the 90%, they would like to advise the friends to bring into the organization, they can work together. And grumpy developer is only 60%. So the happy developer actually bringing talented team together because they're happy and attracting their friends to work together as a team. And grumpy developer, they don't. So now we are looking for a skill set, people to work together. And DevSecOps has become a magnet to get a skill set team together and working as a harmony. So it's another things for the HR perspective. We should really think about what we can do. Like technical work is affecting our HR strategies. If team is working well, if team is producing well, they're happy, they're able to get more other team members outside and work the same. It's not a money issue. It's about the satisfaction on the work, actually.
Yeah. Well, and that's what Dan Pink's research showed that, and Herb Simon and lots of other people, that you can take money off the table as long as there's enough for you to, take care of your family and things like that. Beyond sort of a point, it's all these other things that determine satisfaction and happiness in the job. The autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the big things that knowledge workers are looking for. In terms of how users interact, the user interaction, were there things in the survey about sort of how the perspective of the user changed, or the perception of the developers changed towards their users if they're happy, or if they're, as the survey says, the grumpy developers? Any insights on that?
So based on the survey, we find out that a happy developer, which is DevOps organization, are frequently deploying to the production environment versus non-grumpy. Like on average, they're able to deploy more than 50% per week and deploy an application. And other organization, either like a non-DevOps organization or the grumpy developer, are deploying into the production environment and 9%, and then usually they're following every other week's about the 20%. So the happiness is also affecting the deployments. So we can deploy much quicker and much faster, and with the DevSecOps, because we can see the result and then get back and respond quickly for any incidents. That's another thing we discovered that. Another one we discovered in the survey, again, it takes less time for response and incident and happy developers versus, again, grumpy developer. 3 days is typical average response time for happy developers versus a grumpy about 45 days. So it is huge differences. If we are responding any incident in 3 days, that makes really much quicker to reply any work in a short time versus 45 days is really, really long 45 days, because 45 days is too much. It's dangerous. There's many examples of what we saw. Delaying in a zero response, it's going to cause us so much time and money and exposing data for some other purpose. So it was another mind-boggling than I saw it.
That difference, I can sort of understand it from the viewpoint that if I'm deploying multiple times a week, then chances are that I'm actually going to be able to get to my code faster where the source of the problem is, right? And if I'm not deploying very often, then it's going to take me longer to get back to where the problem is. So I would have expected maybe 2 weeks instead of 3 days. 45 days, though, that is a really, really big difference. So when we talk about all of these things together, we're looking at different aspects of the DevSecOps principles that align with creating happier developers. We're talking about having a culture of trust. We're talking about automation that effectively reduces the extraneous cognitive load, and it reduces the amount of time that we have to spend doing rework kinds of activities. We're talking about the monitoring aspect in terms of being able to see the effects of any changes that we make. So that leads to better autonomy. It also leads to us being able to catch things faster, 3 days versus 45 days. And infrastructure as code is one of those big enablers that helps us to collaborate and to make sure that all of us are kind of on the same page in terms of what it is that we are actually producing. So all of those things. So I guess my point is all of the elements of DevSecOps contribute to happier developers, not just the automation. So it goes back to what the SEI is always saying, that you can't just look at automation in isolation. You've got to look at all of these things.
That's exactly true, Susie. We don't want to look at the one elements. It is a combination of all. Like even when you have a great platform, it is on place. There are many examples I saw in my engagements. People are building a great DevSecOps environment, but they cannot use it effectively because there is a process or engineering work needs to be supported environment. Because otherwise, you just buy a tool from a shelf and put in an environment, it is not going to solve the problem. We have to really look to use effectiveness of the tools, effectiveness of DevSecOps environment. That will help us as a team to solve our problem, which is the manual problem that we discuss, improving the communication as a result, or improving the trustworthiness between team members, being transparent between team members. So if you use effectively tools, creating that culture. Again, it's not a 1 day or a week job. It is a journey. And other things we have to make sure that to go from here to our end goal, it takes time.
Sure.
And especially if we are starting from a greenfield environment, which we have started from the beginning, it's much easier versus brownfield environment. We are starting from a legacy system. We have to maintain the old code bases. It's another topic we may discuss. It is difficult on an organization has been established and then putting a new DevSecOps concept. Even for Microsoft, Microsoft was known as a software guru. It took them a couple of years to build up a DevSecOps journey
Right.
in their organizations. If I'm not remembering correct, it looks like 3 years they spent the time to build up a DevSecOps concept with their leadership. Their leadership, Satya start from a team perspective, and then how he put it, and he said we are empowering our users to make sure they can do their job well. So it changed the perception, and after that, the technologists support that visions, and people support it as well.
Right.
Again, it's a different topic we discussed, but going back to your question, Susie, it is not the one element. It's a combination of all, combination of the principles with the right processes and the right architecture that makes a really good, happy environments. And then we saw an example, as I said, survey, leadership will be happy because they can see the result immediately. And program manager will happy they can see the on-demand tasking and schedules. And security person will happy they can trust their developers, what developers are working on it. And developer can trust with the security team members because security team will help them to learn and then advise what needs to be done. And other things I'm going to open up, if you have time, open up that learning pieces, Susie. The learning is security in the context of security is important because we don't really teach the security concept in the school. We're talking about the engineering principles. We are talking about the software engineering like algorithms and operating systems, database, and all these components. A few schools teaching is security because security is a living thing. It is requiring to keep up the knowledge as continuous basis. So I'm not expecting every developer know every vulnerabilities, but the developer knows what to do based on their work, based on the technology. When it comes to security, they have to follow up the new trends in terms of the new attack patterns, maybe new vulnerabilities. And we see a lot of vulnerabilities keep coming in the day. So only the team knowledgeable, if the security team are knowledgeable. The what security team can tell the dev team, here is the solutions you can use. Here's the feedback for you to learn. So basically, DevSecOps is really helping the developer to build up their knowledge with the security perspective. It's kind of like a small size learning pieces, which is specific to each vulnerabilities.
Right.
And then they can learn over and over and again. That's a good side effect. It's a positive side effect of DevSecOps.
And it allows them to learn patterns. I mean, I think that's what
Exactly.
most of the security folk I know, that's when they feel like they've succeeded, is when the developers have gone from needing guidance on individual vulnerabilities to being able to see patterns and being able to predict, what, if I use this pattern in this kind of code, I've seen that kind of vulnerability before, so I don't want to do that. I want to do something. I want to use one of these other solutions that prevents that kind of thing from happening. And we, as you said, the vulnerabilities morph, they evolve, but the patterns of thinking that lead to a lot of them, are pretty basic. And it's more about the threat actors, finding different ways of applying the patterns that have worked for them before. And we sometimes give them those kinds of opportunities with different architectural choices and different coding choices, but it's sort of figuring out what those patterns are and then eliminating those in the way that we work. That kind of learning takes practice.
Right.
And that's one of the things we get from DevSecOps, as you said earlier. We get more time to practice because we're not doing the extraneous, kinds of things that, like, putting 5 development environments up so that we can test our installs. So
Exactly.
All right. So I want to thank you again for spending this time with us. And I'm hoping that some of the leadership that may see this kind of a podcast will understand that what we're trying to get at here is to help motivate people to actually take the steps, because it is a journey and it does cost resources and it's something different. But getting to happier developers gets a lot of good business results, not just individual job satisfaction, which as an individual we want, but as an organization, what is it about it that makes us want happy developers? It's because those happy developers give us more positive business results. And so I thank you for spending this time and helping us to talk about these things so people can get some better ideas about how they can go about this. For our viewers, I want you to know that the transcripts that we provide with these podcasts will have a reference to the survey that Hasan has been referring to throughout the podcast. So you'll be able to look at that report on your own. Also, any time, just like always, you have questions about what we've talked about, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@sei.cmu.edu. We will have this podcast available on our website, as well as from all of the other places that you get podcasts in today's world. So I want to thank you once again for viewing today.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.